In our previous videos, we've looked at arrays, loops, and the break statement. In this video, we're going to take a look at multi-dimensional arrays. Now, multi-dimensional arrays are not frequently used in Java because we have objects, and sometimes object-oriented programming sometimes a multi-dimensional array is a way to cheat and get around object-oriented programming, which generally is not a good idea. That's going to lead us to errors and things like that. So not commonly used, but there again, you might be looking at somebody else's code and you might wonder what this is. Now for an array, what we've seen so far is a one-dimensional array where we had like number of trips with 50, 60, and 100, something like that. So for a multi-dimensional array, think of a spreadsheet like this, where we could have trip distance, and then we could have destination. So a description or a name of the destination. So in this case, we could have 50. Well, let's see, where does 50 miles take you from Cincinnati? Probably roughly to Dayton. 100 miles would get you to Columbus. Or if you want to go south, that would also take you down to Louisville as well. Or what, Louisville, I think maybe 120 miles. So we'll say Louisville, depending on where you're going. So you see here, instead of just having a number, we have a number and a name. But the reason why I have some caution here is really this could be an object. Instead of being two different items, this could be an object. Now, I did use a by the way, one trick with a multi-dimensional array is, this is kind of a lie. They both have to be the same data type. And here I have an int on the left and a string on the right. So that wouldn't really work for a multi-dimensional array. I did use a multi-dimensional array in a case where I really wanted to eke out the smallest pieces of performance. And that was on the Plant Places mobile search by color. So if you take a look at this, this is the search by color screen on plantplaces.com mobile. Which is where you can take a picture of something and it will find the top 16 colors of that picture, and then you can press one of these colors and you can see a flower that matches that color. Well, here's the trick. Take a look at this picture. And what color do you see predominantly? Probably blue, but you'll notice there's no blue down in the results. And why is that? Well, name a blue flower. As simple as that sounds, there are very, very few blue flowers. So what I did on the mobile app is I put down a filter that would look at this photo and it would filter out any colors that you would not see in a flower, and it shows only colors that you would see in a flower. And that was a multi-dimensional array because in that case, the colors are red, green, and blue, and they're represented with integers. So essentially it was we'll clear this out just a moment. It was a list that looked like this. Whoops. Okay, it was a list that looked like this. We would have maybe a red value and a green value and a blue value, and then every color that was represented would have values here. So red, green, and blue, as we represent them on computer monitors, we'll represent them in a range from 0 to 255. And 0 means none of that color, 255 means all of that color. So 255, 255, 255 would be all green, all red, all blue, which in other words is the color white, because it's all colors together. 0, 0, and 0 would be no red, no green, no blue, which would essentially be the color black. 255, 0, and 0 would be all red, and you can probably see where this is going. 0, 255, 0 would be solid green, and of course 0, 0, 255 would be solid blue. Now I used a multi-dimensional array here because first of all I'm getting the data from an online data source, and that data source looks like this. This is a page that plantplaces.com mobile hits as soon as you start it. It just gets this page, which you see is about 1,000 known colors for plants or for flowers, where we have those colors in the database. Now you see, the design is, when you're on your mobile phone, the network can be, maybe not as fast as you'd like. So the idea is get the data down as soon as possible. You see there's no XML formatting, there's no JSON formatting, it's just a flat file, and for having 1,000 rows, it's a very small flat file because there's no overhead to it. That's reason number one. Reason number two is it is on a mobile device where things like memory are limited, and also processor speed. These kind of things are limited, so we really need to eke out every bit of performance we possibly can. So for a multi-dimensional array in our program, we have a couple of options. We could say number of trips, and then we could also have, where we could have the distance traveled. We could also maybe have a reimbursement rate if it's a work trip or something like that, or maybe we could have a number of pounds that we're moving if we're driving a truck or something like that. Let's go ahead and just make it a reimbursement rate. So I'm going to make this a two-dimensional array by putting a second set of square brackets. We're still going to have 100 trips, but now I'm going to say we're going to store two pieces of information in each of those trips. The first piece of information will be the distance. The second piece of information will be the reimbursement rate in cents, so we can enter a whole number rate. So let's go down and we see it's gonna get a little mad at us here, because since we have two square brackets in the declaration, we also have to have two square brackets wherever we're using this. So the trip counter, where we're storing the distance, we're going to keep the trip counter here. That's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to 99, or actually 0 through 99. But I'm going to add a second dimension, which is 0, which means the very first column of this two-dimensional array will be the distance we wish to travel. Now what we'll do is we'll say trips, and then we'll still use that trip counter, but we're going to add another dimension 1, which is going to stand for the reimbursement rate. So let's prompt the user for a reimbursement rate. Okay, we'll borrow a little bit from here. Enter, let's see, reimbursement rate per mile. Okay, now we can't reuse the same variable, so we're going to have to call this str reimbursement rate. And now, instead of assigning to an intermediate short-term variable, I'm going to go ahead and parse it, and parse it from a string to an int, and assign it directly to this address in our array. So I'll say equals integer dot parse int, and we'll say str reimbursement rate. I left the intermediate variable here just for clarity, but down here we see we can take a shortcut and do it just in a couple of lines. Now let's go up above, and where we say this vehicle go trips I, this is where we're iterating over the vehicle and we're running it a given distance. Well, once again, in a two-dimensional array, we have to supply two dimensions. The first dimension isn't enough. We have to say the first dimension, and then column number 0 is how far we're going to go. Now, what I might do is I might say reimbursement total. We'll do a system out print line, reimbursement total. And for this one, we'll say, okay, we'll make up a reimbursement total. We'll say int reimburse. Let's make it a double. Reimbursement total equals, let's say trips, our I counter variable, and now column number 1, which is actually the second column, that's our cents per mile. Okay, and then we're going to say times trips I, which is the iteration we're currently on, and 0, which is the distance we're traveling. But now, since we did cents as a whole number, we have to divide this entire equation by 100 to give it an actual, like a dollar number. So divided by 100 and terminate with a semicolon. I'll make it 100.0 to make it clear that we're using a floating point data type here. Okay, reimbursement total equals reimbursement total, and then we'll say at, and then we'll say trips I and 1, which again, that's our reimbursement rate for this specific trip. Each trip has a different reimbursement rate at blank cents per mile. All right, let's try it out. So I'm going to save and let's try it out. We'll just go ahead and run it. I will do, let's see, we'll do a 20s car, so 20 gallons of gas, 20 miles per gallon, 20,000 on the odometer. We'll just do one car on this trip. Now, distance to travel, let's say 50. Reimbursement rate per mile, we'll say 10. So I would expect, what, about, if that's 10 cents, about $5 on that trip. Do you want to enter another trip? Yes. Distance to travel, we'll say 60. Okay, reimbursement rate per mile, we'll say, what, about 15 cents per mile on that, which would give us about $9 if I'm doing the math right in my head. One more trip, 100, and let's make this one 20 cents per mile, and then we'll say no more trips. Let's take a look at our output. So we see here, before gallons of gas 20, there's our 20s car. After, so we still do the computations we've always done when we're running 50 miles. Now, reimbursement total 5.0 at 10 cents per mile. I probably should use a formatter to make that actually $5.00, but nonetheless you get the idea. Okay, now the next trip, reimbursement total $9 at 15 cents per mile. So remember that second trip we only went 10 more miles than the previous trip. First trip was 50, next trip was 60. But our reimbursement rate was much better, so we got $3 more, even though the trip was just a little bit longer, because we had a higher rate per mile. Now the final trip, we see we went 100 miles, and we said reimbursement total is $20 at 20 cents per mile. So you see, a multi-dimensional array allows us to store information, more than one piece of information per row, where the single-dimensional array allowed only one piece of information per row. The caveat is that information has to be the same data type. The other thing is, if you're using a multi-dimensional array, ask yourself if you should be using a class and an object instead. If it's for a memory-limited application or something where you require very quick performance, then you might have a good use for a multi-dimensional array. I hope this video has been helpful. Check the comments for the YouTube playlist for this video and also for the GitHub repository. Thank you.